Thorn stood amidst 11 groaning giants in the town square, his curved silver blade dry of blood and the legendary military jacket finally back on his shoulders. The Goran captain, a beast of muscle and scars, stared up at him with a terror that surpassed the fear of death. One wrong move, and the calm gardener would become the ghost of the galactic rim once more. Why is it that the quietest men often have the loudest pasts? If you want to see how a shadow becomes a shield, subscribe to Walk the Path with us. Now, let's see how a simple farmer ended up holding the throat of a sector's nightmare. 11 days earlier, the station's water recycler had broken for the 3rd time that week, and Elias had spent the morning elbow-deep in the rust-colored soil of Ethelgard. The dirt was honest. It didn't ask for codes or kill counts. It only asked for water and time. Elias wiped a smudge of grease from his forehead, his fingers lingering on the heavy iron key that hung beneath his tunic. It was a cold, jagged reminder of a life he'd buried beneath the rows of Terran pips. Beside him, Kaelin moved with the fluid grace of the Xylari, her 4 arms rhythmically sorting seeds. She hummed a low, melodic tune that usually settled the static in his mind. But today, the air felt thin. He watched her, noticing the way the sun caught the iridescent sheen of her skin. She was the peace he didn't deserve. Elias knew he was a man living on borrowed time, hiding a set of skills that the galaxy still whispered about in dark corners. The most dangerous man in the sector wasn't hiding in a fortress. He was weeding the garden. By midday, the sky changed. It wasn't the natural shift of Ethelgard's twin suns, but the jagged, artificial tear of warp drive screaming into the atmosphere. 3 Goran marauder ships, charcoal gray and bristling with illegal cannons, breached the cloud layer. Panic rippled through the outpost like a physical shockwave. Elias didn't scream. He didn't run. He simply stood, his heart rate dropping into a rhythmic, terrifyingly slow beat, a ghost of a reflex he hadn't used in a decade. He grabbed Kaelin's hand, his grip firm but careful not to crush her delicate bones. "Go to the cellar," he said. His voice was a rasp, stripped of the warmth he'd spent years cultivating. Kaelin's large, dark eyes searched his. "Elias, what are you doing?" "The cellar, Kaelin. Now." He watched her disappear beneath the heavy floorboards just as the first boot slammed onto his porch. 3 pirates burst through the door, laughing, their heavy breath smelling of cheap synthale and ozone. One of them, a hulking brute with a cybernetic eye, swept a hand across the mantel. A small, wood-framed wedding photograph tumbled to the floor. The sound of the glass shattering was louder than the screams outside. Elias looked down at the fractured image of his wedding day, the one moment of pure light he'd managed to steal from a life of darkness. Have you ever wondered if peace is a gift or a choice? Join us as we explore the cost of restraint in a galaxy that only understands force. The pirate laughed, raising a heavy shock baton. "Look at this little dirt scratcher. He's frozen." Elias wasn't frozen. He was calculating trajectories. He was measuring the distance to the heavy chest at the foot of his bed. He was remembering that Ethelgard was a world of peace. But peace is a choice that sometimes requires a blade. The lock on the heavy chest clicked a sound like a bone snapping in a silent room. He didn't just pull the blade out. He became an extension of the silvered steel. The first pirate didn't even see the movement. He only felt the wind of the blade passing an inch from his throat and the sudden, jarring weight of his own momentum as Elias stepped inside his guard, swept his lead leg, and sent him crashing through the heavy oak dining table. The other 2 froze. They were used to farmers who begged. They weren't used to men who moved like shadows given physical form. Elias stood between them and the cellar door. The curved blade held low. His breathing hadn't changed. His eyes were flat, devoid of the rage that usually fuels a fight. That was the most terrifying part. He wasn't angry. He was working. The key around his neck didn't open a treasury, Elias whispered, the words intended only for himself. It opened a tomb of skills I'd sworn to forget. He moved through the outpost with a terrifying, non-lethal efficiency. In the central square, under the flickering lights of the colony's distress beacons, the Goran forces were busy loading crates of pips onto their transport. Elias drifted between the shadows of the grain silos. He didn't use a pulse rifle. He used gravity, leverage, and the environment. A pirate was pulled into the darkness of an alley. Another was found slumped against a cooling unit, his nervous system temporarily shorted by a precise strike to the neck. It was a systematic dismantling. The air in the square grew heavy, not just with the scent of ozone from the pirate ships, but with the sudden realization of the Gorans that they were no longer the hunters. Science tells us that the human brain under extreme stress can enter a state of hyper-focus where time appears to dilate. For a man like Elias, trained in the Black Ops divisions of the old Terran hegemony, this wasn't a rare occurrence. It was a biological setting. He wasn't faster than a bullet, but he was faster than the man pulling the trigger. He processed the trajectory of every weapon and the tension in every pirate's trigger finger before they even realized they were afraid. Then came Krogos. The Goran captain stood 7 feet tall, his skin the color of bruised plums and armored in scavenged plating. He held a vibrating vibroaxe that hummed with a low-frequency growl. "I heard stories of a ghost on this rim," Krogos bellowed, looking at the 11 men groaning on the ground around Elias. "A legendary operative who died in the siege of Voros. I thought it was a myth to scare recruits." Elias stepped into the light of the square. He didn't look like a gardener anymore. He looked like the end of a war. "I was dead," Elias said. "I liked being dead." It was quiet. Krogos lunged. The vibroaxe tore through the air, whistling as it aimed for Elias's shoulder. Elias didn't retreat. He stepped into the arc, the silver blade of his heirloom catching the axe's haft. Metal screamed against metal. With a twist of his hips, Elias redirected the captain's massive strength, using the pirate's own weight to spin him off balance. The duel lasted less than 10 seconds. It wasn't a brawl. It was a surgery. Elias's blade danced, tapping against Krogos's armor plates, finding the gaps, never drawing blood, but striking with enough force to numb limbs. A final kick to the back of the knee brought the giant to his stones. Elias stood behind him, the edge of his blade resting against the captain's jugular. He didn't kill a single pirate that day, which was exactly why they were so terrified of him. The surrender was total. The Gorans fled, leaving their spoils and their pride in the dirt of Aethelgard. The next morning, a silver-crested commander from the sector guard arrived, prompted by the outpost's distress signal. He stood in the square looking at the neatly bound pirates and then at the man in the worn military jacket. "We thought you were a ghost, Thorn," the commander said, offering a stiff salute. "You saved millions during the uprising. I didn't think you'd end up growing vegetables." "The soil is easier to manage than the senators," Elias replied, his voice regaining a hint of the farmer's softness. The secret was gone. The integration had begun. Elias was no longer just the man who tended the pips. He was the wall that kept the darkness at bay. Defrau. The sunset painted the sky in shades of violet and gold. In his hand, he held the wood-framed wedding photograph. He had meticulously glued the shattered pieces of glass back together. The cracks were still visible, jagged lines running through their smiling faces, but the image was whole again. The photograph felt heavier now, more real. It wasn't just a dream of peace anymore. It was a reminder that even a broken life can be held together if you have the right hands to do the work. He placed the frame on the small table between them, the glass catching the last light of the fading suns. "If you had to choose between a peaceful lie and a violent truth, which would you pick to protect the ones you love? Tomorrow we look at the shadows humans leave behind. We'll be right here when you're ready."